In this video, I'm going to teach you a simple persuasion technique made famous by Dale Carnegie in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Using this technique, you can sell more if you work in sales, you can influence colleagues at work to get them to do what you want, and at home with your wife or your husband or your lover, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or with your kids, you can use this technique to get them to do what you want. Hi everybody, I'm Bruce Lambert from HowCommunicationWorks.com, a channel where I teach you communication skills so you can improve your relationships, advance in your career, get more done, and have more confidence. Let's get started. In Dale Carnegie's famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, he says one of the most useful influence techniques that he uses is to, quote, give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Well, what does he mean by that? He means that if we characterize people in a positive way, we talk about their good qualities, we talk about any positive quality, they will act in such a way as to live up to the reputation that we've given them. The technical name for this influence technique is Altercasting. Altercasting. The word alter means other, and casting means as if to cast someone into the role, to place them into this role. So what I want to do in this video is give you a few examples of how altercasting works, and then describe to you what's going on in the background, sort of psychologically and socially, that makes this influence technique so successful and so powerful. So altercasting, an influence technique where you cast someone into a social role so that they will be more likely to do the thing that we want them to do. So what are some examples? Something like, if you're trying to sell infant formula to a mother, or healthy fruits and vegetables, or some sort of product that you think is healthy and nutritious, you can say to the mother, as a loving mother, I know how important it is for you to give your children healthy and nutritious foods. So this reminds the woman of her role as a mother. And we know that the role of the mother has these expectations that you take good care of your children, and part of taking good care of your children is giving them healthy and nutritious food. So we cast her into this role, we remind her of her role as a mother, and then we say, we know you want to give your children healthy and nutritious food, and oh, by the way, I have healthy and nutritious food to sell you. So that's one example. Another one might be, if you're a successful person, and you've reached a certain status in life, a salesman might try to say to you, a person in your position in life absolutely needs to have a car that reflects your station in life, or needs to have clothes that reflect your status. So we cast you into the role of as a successful person, businessman, leader, whatever you are. We remind you of that social role. We remind you that there are expectations associated with that social role of being well-dressed or driving a fancy car. And in that way, we induce you to behave in a way that's consistent with the role that we just cast you into. This is altercasting. The third example, remember in a previous video, which I'll link to up here, I talked about a typical situation at work or in school where you're leading a group project, but you have one member of the group project who's not pulling their own weight. In this case, we call that person Ron. You have a group project, Ron was recommended to you, but he's been late to meetings, he's not showed up to some meetings altogether, and tomorrow the project is due and Ron hasn't done his part, and he calls you up the night before and says he hasn't done his part, he needs more time. Well, one thing you can say to Ron to get him to do his part is something like, Ron, I know you to be a committed and responsible and dedicated professional. And because I know you to be this sort of person, I know that you'll come to that meeting tomorrow prepared with your part completed just as you promised. So we use altercasting. We cast Ron into the role as a committed, responsible, dedicated professional person, reminding him that he is that way, and in that way inducing him to behave in a way that's consistent with that description, with that role that we've cast him into. All of these are examples of altercasting. So why does it work? Why does altercasting work? In order to understand why it works, we have to first understand a few things about social roles. So a social role is a set of expectations associated with a given social position. So all of us can easily identify the social roles that we occupy. So for me, it's like father, teacher, brother, friend, musician, stuff like that. These are my various social roles, and I could list many more of them, and all of us could. So associated, what's the definition of each of those roles? Well, we could say a father is a person who, a brother is a person who, a teacher is a person who, and associated with each of those roles is a set of expectations. So a role is really nothing more than the set of expectations associated with a given social position. So the thing about these expectations is they exert power over our behavior. We are under pressure in a way, or another way of putting it, we are motivated to live up to the expectations of these various social roles. But we have multiple social roles. I just listed 4 or 5 of my social roles, and each of them has slightly different expectations. So how do I know which expectations to live up to in any given moment? Well, that depends on which identity is salient. Salient is just another word for relevant or important. Which social role do I want to enact in this given moment? And what Altercasting does is increase the salience of the social role. And it reminds us of that social role and then motivates us to act in a way that's consistent with that role so that we do the behavior that someone's trying to influence us to do. So another thing about social roles is that they don't exist in the abstract. Social roles are created and sustained and maintained in social performances. That is, in our actions. Remember my very first video, which I'll also link to here, I talked about the world is a stage, and we are all actors on a stage, metaphorically speaking. And that all the time we're acting out these various social performances in order to justify the claim that we occupy certain roles. So if I want to be a teacher, if I want to be a YouTuber, I have to make YouTube videos. If I want to be a teacher, I have to teach. If I want to be a father, I have to parent. So each of our roles demands that we do these behaviors, that we do these performances. And not only that, every role is hungry for something called role support. What that is, it's external validation from important audiences. So if my students don't think I'm a teacher or a good teacher, I have a hard time maintaining my identity as a teacher. If my children don't think I'm a good parent, I have a hard time maintaining my identity as a good parent, and so on. So every role requires support in the form of social validation for an audience. So one thing that's happening in Altercasting is that the person who's the influencer is offering us role support in exchange for the behavior. They're basically saying, I'm reminding you of this role that you occupy, and I'm telling you, if you do this behavior, it will garner you support and validation for this role that you value. And this motivates us to do the behavior because we want support for that role. We want validation for our identities. And we think, oh yeah, if I do this behavior, I can get social validation for this role that I value and feel more secure in my identity. This motivates us to do the behavior. There's another psychological principle at work in Altercasting, I think, and that is what's called cognitive dissonance and our desire to avoid cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is that uncomfortable feeling when we have two conflicting beliefs or when we engage in a behavior which is inconsistent with our beliefs. So if I say, I'm a person who's concerned about the environment, but then I drive a car that consumes an enormous amount of gasoline or pollutes a lot, or I litter, littering, I say I have a piece of garbage and I'm somewhere in the city and there's no close garbage can. I'm really tempted to just litter, but I can't because I feel like I'm someone who's concerned about the environment, and littering would cause so much dissonance in my mind, that uncomfortable feeling of acting inconsistently with my own values, with my own beliefs, that I won't do it. So we are psychologically motivated to avoid this uncomfortable feeling of dissonance. And the way we avoid it primarily is acting consistently with our beliefs and values. And another thing that Altercasting does is it reminds us of our role and of the expectations associated with that role, and it gives us an opportunity to act consistently with that role or with that identity. And this resolves dissonance. So this principle of consistency and avoiding dissonance is another psychological factor explaining why Altercasting works. One last thing about roles. Roles are ranked in 2 different ways. I could ask you, list the 3 most important roles in your life, and you wouldn't have difficulty. So for me, it would be something like, father, son, friend, scientist, something like that, brother. I would list my roles in that way in order to, and that is what scientists call their prominence hierarchy, meaning the ranking in terms of their long-term importance to me. So over the long term, being a father is my sort of most important role. But over the shorter term, like from moment to moment, I might be a teacher one moment, a friend one moment, a scientist, a musician, a teacher, a YouTuber. Right now, being a YouTuber, that's my most salient identity. So we have the long-term ranking of our identities, and then we have this short-term, what's called the salience hierarchy. Which of our many identities is active in this precise moment? So for me, in this precise moment, my YouTube identity is most salient. When I leave, it might be my college professor identity or something like that. So what Altercasting does is change the salience of our various identities, and it brings to the top, for the moment, one particular identity whose expectations involve the behavior that the person's trying to influence us to do. So Altercasting is all about changing the salience of our identities or our roles in order to make an identity salient, that identity which is consistent with the behavior that they're trying to influence us to do. Like the examples I gave of a mother trying to increase the salience of her identity as a mother so she'll buy healthy food for her kids, or increase the salience of you as a business person so that you buy fancy clothes, or influence the salience of Ron's identity as a dedicated professional so he'll do the group project. All of those work because they influence the salience, the moment-to-moment importance of various of our identities. So, how are we going to use this technique? We have to think of the behavior. We know what behavior we want people to do. And we have to say, okay, which of a person's identities is that behavior consistent with? Which of their identities will this behavior reinforce? And then we want to remind them of that identity. So that's the basic trick. Figure out which identity the targeted behavior will be consistent with or will reinforce, and then remind the person of that identity. And that's Altercasting. It increases the salience of the identity, and then the person will be motivated to act in a way which is consistent with that role or that identity. So that's Altercasting. Give it a try. I think it's a really useful technique. You'll see it being used all the time. People mention our identities in order to influence us. So in the comments, talk to me about, I'd like to hear one example of when Altercasting has been used on you. So tell me whether it worked or whether it didn't work, but give me in the comments below one example of whether of when Altercasting was used on you and whether it worked. So if you like this kind of video, I hope that you'll consider giving us a like, subscribing and turning on the little bell icon so you get notified, and also going over to howcommunicationworks.com, which is the website associated with this channel where you can sign up for our newsletter and learn about new videos that are being posted, but also read 30 or more articles about how communication works in a variety of different settings, and learn more about it in written form. As well, on howcommunicationworks.com, I'm now offering one-on-one coaching. In case you think that you might be able to benefit from one-on-one coaching from me, there's an application form that will allow you to set up a phone call with me where we can do a brief half-hour consultation to see if one-on-one coaching might be something that you could benefit from and that would be a good fit for both of us. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.